Hello, my name is Megan Dickinson. Thank you for taking the time to watch my informative speech on the Korean War. Currently, our military is waging war on the terrorists who aim to harm our country. Throughout our history, our nation has been involved in numerous wars and conflicts. Sadly, though, there is one that many don't think about when talking about those wars, the Korean War. Nicknamed the Forgotten War, the Korean War was a time of division in Korea. A conflict arose between the North and South over recent elections. Hostilities started on June 26, 1950. They lasted until July 27, 1953, when a ceasefire agreement was signed. Today, North and South Korea are still experiencing conflict. Some say that the war is still going on. Recently, I have taken the time to research the roles of women in this conflict. Being in a health-related program at PJC, it is interesting to see what contributions healthcare professionals had on the war. While doing my research, it amazed me that so many women served in the medical service at that time. I was also intrigued by the many different ways that medical personnel helped the people. It was touching to see how the veterans felt about those they called doc. When the Korean War started, there were approximately 22,000 women in the armed services. Roughly 7,000 of them were healthcare professionals. The rest served in line assignments in the Women's Army Corps. When in the Air Force, women accepted for volunteer emergency service and women Marines. When the fighting began in June 1950, the Army Nurse Corps had a total strength of about 3,450. 1 year later, the ANC's strength had grown to 5,397. Most of these nurses were World War II veterans who had joined the reserves at the end of the war. During the war, approximately 540 nurses, all volunteers, served in Korea. On July 5, 1950, 57 nurses arrived at Pusan, South Korea, to set up a U.S. Army hospital. The nurses began caring for casualties the next day. 2 days later, 12 U.S. Army nurses moved forward with a mobile Army surgical hospital on the front line perimeter. On December 5, 1950, the Nurse Corps had assisted in the evacuation of about 3,900 patients after Chinese intervention in the war. By the end of the war, they helped evacuate about 350,000 patients. The need for naval medical facilities in Asia also grew after the war began. The Navy Nurse Corps expanded in its ranks by recalling reserves nurses with World War II experience. These nurses served in hospitals as well as the Haven-class ships. These hospital ships were a new type of mobile hospital. They moved from place to place, shifting about the Korean coast as needed. In the first months of the Korean War, the U.S. Army and U.S. Marines preferred rail and sea evacuation for most of their casualties. But the war soon showed that air evacuation was the ideal method of removing casualties from the front lines. In the summer of 1950, Air Force H-5 rescue helicopters of the 3rd Air Force Rescue Squadron went into action as frontline medical airstrips. Even under enemy fire, many American lives were saved. The other services contributed to the development of combat aeromedical evacuation. The Army soon set up its own helicopter evacuation service. By late 1951, aeromedical helicopters enabled the U.S.'s Navy hospital ships to serve as floating hospitals off Korea rather than as medical transports. The medical personnel who tended the wounded in the Korean War are held in the highest regard by veterans. These heroic people, the Army medics and Navy Corps, thought nothing of risking their own lives to give aid to those who were fighting on the front line. While burp guns were fighting deadly bullets and mortars were exploding around them, the medics were there on the spot, saving lives of combatants. Most of the medical personnel in Korea had never before seen the kind of death and destruction they witnessed in Korea. Many were fresh out of medical school, and some had little experience dealing with the sick and wounded beyond giving shots and administering medication. They were heroic, and they will forever be remembered with honor and respect by those who return home from Korea. Very often, Korean War veterans testify that they are living today because of a nameless doc saved their life in spite of poor odds for survival under combat conditions. As I stated before, these medical personnel were invaluable to the soldiers of the Korean War. They were risking their lives to save complete strangers. Those veterans were very grateful for all they had done. Approximately 54,000 U.S. soldiers died in the Korean War. Had it not been for the medical personnel service in the war, this number would have likely been much higher.
Okay.
Hold on. Is that good?
Yeah.